He is the loneliest old father. Because he has been divorced for many years and custody of his daughter was awarded to his ex-wife, living alone, he can usually only look at his daughter's photos and smile foolishly. As a retired CIA agent, he often gathers with former colleagues to catch up. Although this old agent named Bryan is now focused entirely on his daughter, his former colleague Sam still wants to ask him to do a job, acting as a bodyguard for a popular singer's concert. You can earn $2,500 in just 4 hours, which can be described as a very relaxing job. Originally, Sam was a bit worried that Bryan wouldn't agree, but unexpectedly he readily agreed without hesitation. What Sam didn't know was that Bryan actually had his own little plan. The next night, Bryan began working as the singer's bodyguard. He originally thought Shira was just a third-rate celebrity, but he didn't expect the scene to be exceptionally explosive, with fans packing the passageways so tightly that water couldn't trickle through and deafening shouts everywhere. This undoubtedly increased the difficulty of the protection work exponentially. When Shira was doing her final rehearsal backstage, Bryan found an opportunity to strike up a conversation with her. It turned out that his daughter's dream since childhood was to become a singer, and he wanted to ask if Shira could give him some advice. But unexpectedly, Shira was quite arrogant and domineering, leaving him speechless with a single sentence.
Yeah, I do. Tell her to pick another career.
During the intermission, Bryan received a call from his daughter Kim, inviting him to have lunch together tomorrow noon. Bryan was overjoyed and immediately showed off happily to his former colleagues. The concert finally ended, and an exhausted Shira walked off the stage preparing to leave. But unexpectedly, overly enthusiastic fans broke through the iron barriers at this moment and rushed crazily in Shira's direction. The bodyguards hurriedly escorted Shira to retreat urgently. Just as Bryan was leading Shira to the back area, a fan who had been lurking in a dark corner suddenly rushed out holding a knife. Bryan took down the crazy fan with just a few moves. He quickly got Shira into the car and rapidly left the concert venue. The experienced Bryan opened a bottle of cola and had the shaken Shira drink it in large gulps, because sugar can soothe tight nerves. Shira was scared to tears and leaned on Bryan's shoulder. Looking at this girl who wasn't much older than his own daughter, Bryan could only hold her gently like an old father, giving her comfort. Back at home, Shira met with Bryan alone. She no longer had her previous haughty attitude, but instead handed Bryan a small piece of paper with her own phone number and her music teacher's number written on it. Shira was very grateful to Bryan for saving her life, and she wanted to help his daughter achieve her dream. The next day, Bryan met his daughter at a restaurant, but unexpectedly, his ex-wife Lenore also came. It turned out this was not a simple get-together. His daughter Kim wanted to go on a trip to Europe with a female classmate during the holidays. But since Kim was only 17 years old and a minor, she needed Bryan to sign his consent. Bryan had dealt with the dark side all his life, and he knew the sinister nature of human hearts in this world. He was very unwilling to let his inexperienced daughter travel alone to Europe without the guidance of an elder. After all, that place is not as beautiful as it appears on the surface. Kim got anxious, and Lenore was fanning the flames on the side. Lenore, who always held a grudge against Bryan, would mindlessly oppose whatever decision Bryan made. This finally caused Kim to run away angrily with tears in her eyes. And Bryan didn't even have time to take out that small piece of paper. Lenore left behind a hurtful remark at the end.
Putting our daughter at risk by going to Paris? You're pathetic.
Bryan still didn't want to fall out with his precious daughter, so he eventually went to Lenore's house and agreed that his daughter could go to Europe, but she must maintain telephone contact with him at all times. Kim hugged Bryan excitedly. In that instant, Bryan felt as if he saw that cute little baby from the past again. Bryan saw Kim off at the airport, and watching his daughter walk happily into the departure lounge, Bryan was still full of worry, afraid that something bad might happen. The two girls walked out of the French airport excitedly. Just as they were constantly taking photos, a handsome guy approached them to strike up a conversation. The handsome-looking Peter kept praising the two girls for their beauty, making Kim's companion Amanda's heart flutter, and she accepted Peter's invitation to share a taxi without any guard up. Kim and Amanda were staying at Amanda's relative's luxury mansion in France. After arriving at the location, Amanda bluntly told Peter that no one was home at her relative's place, even giving him the apartment number. Kim, who still had a bit of defensiveness, couldn't stop her even if she tried. The two girls thought the Peter before them was harmless, little knowing that as soon as they entered the house, this seemingly kind Peter immediately made a phone call, telling his associate that two little lambs had taken the bait. Amanda turned on the stereo and danced recklessly in the unsupervised mansion. Kim saw her father calling, but because the music was too loud, she found the most secluded bathroom to answer her father's call. Kim was listening to Bryan's various instructions with boredom, when suddenly, in the next second, she saw several burly men break into the living room opposite. Those men forcibly kidnapped Amanda. Kim was so scared for a moment that she was at a loss for what to do. Hearing that something was wrong, Bryan quickly took out his work briefcase, while rapidly asking his daughter what people she met leaving the airport today, and took out a recorder. He told Kim to quickly go to the next bedroom and hide under the bed, and Kim did so immediately. Following that, Bryan told Kim with a heavy heart what to do next. He told Kim she will likely be taken, but she has a crucial 5 to 10 seconds to see the kidnapper's appearance features and shout them out loud into the phone so he can find the criminals faster later. Sure enough, the criminals walked towards the room on this side. Bryan heard that these people were not speaking French, but Albanian. And Albania was the poorest country in Europe in the 90s. Its armed mobs roamed across European countries and were one of the dark forces that gave every country the biggest headache. Kim hid under the bed and saw two people walk out of the room, thinking the other party hadn't found her. But the next second, she was dragged out from under the bed. But at the very end of being kidnapped, Kim did not forget Bryan's instructions. She loudly described the criminal's features she saw: beard, 6 feet tall, moon, and star tattoo on the right hand. Listening to his daughter's screams on the other end of the phone, Bryan's heart was bleeding. He heard the phone being picked up, so he calmly said a paragraph to the listener.
I don't know what you want. If you're looking for ransom, I can tell you I don't have money. If you let my daughter go now, that'll be the end of it. I will not look for you, but if you don't, I will find you. I will look for you, and I will kill you.
After hearing the listener hang up the phone, Bryan knew that he would rest at nothing until one of them was dead. He sent the recording to Sam and asked Sam to help analyze it. Then he drove to Lenore's house late at night and told her that their daughter had been kidnapped. He went to Kim's room, hoping to find something useful. Lenore, who had always strongly hoped her daughter would go to Europe, panicked at this moment. Weeping, she could only place her hope in Bryan, whom she had always looked down upon before. At this time, Sam called. His recording analysis had results. It turned out the man speaking to Bryan was named Marco, an Albanian gang leader roaming in Paris. This gang specializes in trafficking women, and the moon and star tattoo is their organization's symbol. This gang traffics women to other European countries, and Bryan now only has 96 hours left. Once the time passes, he will never find his daughter again. Bryan had no time to comfort the crying and screaming Lenore. He immediately boarded a private plane flying to Europe without stopping. He listened to the recording of the man named Marco over and over again. He wanted to carve this voice into his brain until he found this person. Bryan found the location of Amanda's relative's mansion. He carefully held onto the roof eaves, broke the window, and entered the room. He saw his daughter Kim's backpack, confirming this was the scene of the incident, and the living room was also a mess. He found the spot where his daughter made the call, playing the phone recording while trying to reconstruct the situation at the time. Then he came to the bedroom where Kim hid, and like Kim, hid under the bed, feeling Kim's emotions at that time, and then simulating the scenario. Finally, he discovered a clue from the broken mirror nearby, a wisp of fabric from a man's clothes. When leaving, he found Kim's crushed cell phone on the ground. He took out the SD memory card inside and viewed the photos his daughter took on a machine. Finally, his gaze stopped on a photo. He saw Peter, who took photos for the girls, in the reflection of a display stand. From this, Bryan finally had a lead. At this time, Peter still didn't know he had gotten into big trouble. He was at the airport starting to scout for the next female victim. He set his sights on a blonde girl of prime age who had just got off a plane. It was the same place, the same pickup routine, just as he, having tried this successfully many times, was about to successfully take down another fat sheep. Bryan suddenly pushed Peter into a taxi from behind, then punched Peter's waist hard with his fist, forcing him to say where he took the two girls. But before he could ask 2 sentences, he was dragged out of the car. It turned out Peter's accomplices had arrived. Although the man was strong and sturdy, he was knocked to the ground by Bryan in a few rounds. When Bryan looked into the car again, he found Peter had already run far away. So Bryan drove the taxi directly to chase him. But unexpectedly, Peter's desire to survive was extremely strong. He ran directly into the oncoming traffic lane, and Bryan, whose path was blocked, could only abandon the taxi and chase wildly on foot. Seeing that he was about to be caught, Peter jumped directly off the bridge, landing on a large truck under the bridge. He thought he had escaped a disaster, but unexpectedly he was hit head-on by a speeding truck and died. Although this person got his retribution, the clue Bryan had tried so hard to find was cut off right there. 16 hours had now passed. Time was tight, and he could only find another way. He found his old friend in Paris, Jean-Claude, currently the deputy director of the DSF, the French Directorate of Territorial Security. The DSF was established in April 1989 and is France's counter-espionage intelligence agency. Jean-Claude was quite familiar with the situation on his own turf. The Albanian gang organization had currently grown to several hundred people in France, and this group was now entrenched in the Porte de Clichy area of Paris. This place was a mixed bag full of women engaged in special services everywhere. Bryan rented an Audi and drove to this place. He hired an Albanian university professor named Gregor beforehand to act as his translator. Bryan gave Gregor a large sum of money to wait in the car, and then he began his operation. He found a woman on the street to strike up a conversation, deliberately finding fault without paying for a transaction. Because he delayed the woman from taking business, he directly attracted the thugs who had been supervising from the roadside. Bryan deliberately pretended to be a timid middle-aged man, and then in the instant the thug got close, he installed a listening device on him. Finally, pretending to be afraid, he handed over 50 euros as compensation. But unexpectedly, seeing that Bryan was easy to bully, this thug also snatched another 50 euro bill, and he would soon pay the price for this 100 euro bill. Bryan returned to his car. He had Gregor, who looked confused and didn't understand the situation, start working, asking Gregor to listen to what the conversation on the listening device was about. At first, the content coming from the listening device was all irrelevant casual chat, and Bryan rested with his eyes closed while listening. It wasn't until Gregor said the people in the car were going to a construction site to handle business that Bryan suddenly opened his eyes. He quickly told Gregor to get out of the car and borrowed an Albanian English dictionary from him. Bryan followed the thug's car all the way to a construction site. A large group of workers were lining up outside a tin house to go in. It turned out this was a temporary brothel. Every worker paid money with one hand and received a number token to go in and resolve their physiological needs. And the thug Bryan followed was specifically there to collect the money. Disguised as a worker, Bryan also took a number token and entered the house. Inside, it was partitioned into small individual cubicles with coarse cloth. Bryan opened one to check and found a spiritless girl lying inside. The girl waved to him, and her arm was covered with dense needle marks. It appeared she had been forcibly injected with prohibited substances. A girl who originally had the prime years of her youth was ruined just like that. Bryan lifted the curtains one by one to check. He hoped to find his daughter, but after searching for a long time, he couldn't find her. Suddenly in a cubicle, he saw a familiar denim jacket. This was the clothes Kim wore when she got on the plane. An agitated Bryan punched the big man in the cubicle violently and pushed him out. He gently turned the girl's face, but the girl in front of him was not Kim. Bryan hurriedly asked her about the origin of the clothes, but the girl had already been injected with a large amount of prohibited substances. Her consciousness was completely blurred, and she couldn't answer at all. Bryan stood up helplessly. A minion guarding the door suddenly grabbed Bryan, but how could he be a match for Bryan? He was choked by Bryan with the cloth curtain and knocked unconscious. Several more thugs rushed over holding pistols, but all were knocked to the ground by Bryan. One thug directly shot and killed an innocent woman, and Bryan took him out with a backhand strike. Bryan took the girl who had his daughter's clothes into the car. By this time, the thugs had heard the commotion and brought a large group of people over, raising their hands to fire at Bryan. Because the enemy's firepower was too fierce, Bryan drove the car and fled. He knocked over oil drums, causing a huge explosion, blocking the pursuing enemies. But the thugs still drove cars to chase after him. On the muddy construction site, several cars raced wildly, with thugs in the cars constantly firing machine guns at Bryan. Bryan seized the opportunity, made a sharp turn, and violently rammed over the enemy's pickup truck, but the thugs still chased closely behind. The thugs were very difficult to deal with, chasing tight and shooting constantly. Bryan deliberately drove past a cement mixer truck, then jerked the steering wheel. The thug's small car got sprayed with a window full of water. He couldn't see the road ahead clearly and ended up crashing head-on into a bulldozer. Driving into the city area, Bryan noticed a car following behind. This should be the tail sent by Jean-Claude. He ran a red light directly and sped away, giving the man tailing him an international friendly gesture. Bryan used his usual method to swap cars by the roadside, then tracked down a hotel he used to frequent during his former work. The owner still remembered Bryan and gave him his usual room. Bryan made a simple glucose IV drip, gave the girl a shot, and then injected her with a specific agent to alleviate the toxins. At this point, Bryan was already exhausted. After all, he was a retired old man in his 50s. But when he gently stroked his daughter's clothes, his heart was still filled with grief. He wasn't clear if he could ultimately find his daughter. Exhausted, he just wanted to sit down and rest for a moment, but his phone rang. It turned out Jean-Claude wanted to have a good chat with him. Bryan knew this meeting was not simple. He stood on high ground far away and communicated with Jean-Claude by phone. It turned out that because Bryan caused a big scene in Paris last night, the higher-ups wanted to deport Bryan back to his country. They couldn't solve the long-standing chronic illness of human trafficking, so they could only take action against the person causing trouble right now. Jean-Claude took out a first-class flight ticket and waved it in the air. This was the last thing the French authorities could do for Bryan. But how could Bryan accept that? He hung up the phone decisively. At this moment, Jean-Claude's men also arrived at the location of the phone signal, but they only saw a mobile phone and a walkie-talkie on the ground. It turned out that Bryan had been communicating from a distance using a walkie-talkie all along, something intelligence agencies do and something he had already mastered years ago. The girl Bryan saved finally woke up. He held the jacket and asked the girl how she got it. The girl told Bryan she didn't steal the clothes. Kim gave them to her. It turned out this poor girl was also deceived by someone, tricked into a red house for people's amusement. Fortunately, this girl vaguely remembered that this red house was on Paradise Road. Bryan then found this red house. He took out Jean-Claude's business card and handed it to the thug guarding the door. He disguised himself as a senior executive of the DSF, wanting to speak to the leaders of this Albanian gang. The thug guarding the door was bluffed by Bryan's imposing manner, so he led him inside the house. He was taken into a room where several big men had moon and star patterns tattooed on their hands. It seemed he had found the right place. Bryan knew long ago that Jean-Claude was in cahoots with this group of immigrant desperados, so he posed as the newly appointed DSF person in charge to negotiate a new protection fee with this group. Having dealt with criminal gangs for years, Bryan naturally knew how to communicate with them. With just a few words, he dispelled their suspicions and made them obediently hand over a large sum of money. Before leaving, Bryan took out a piece of paper and deliberately asked one of them to help translate it.
Good luck.
As a result, as soon as this bearded man spoke, Bryan recognized it. The one who spoke to him on the phone that time was the man right in front of him. Bryan began a massacre. Towards these desperados, he did not spare his anger or bullets. Every shot was fatal, and in the blink of an eye, he took out all the bandits. Bryan ran upstairs. All the rooms here had girls who had been trafficked lying in them. He opened one of the rooms and was shocked to find Amanda lying on the bed, but Amanda had already lost her life. Her arm was full of needle marks, appearing to have been tortured to death by the villains. Bryan had no time to feel sorry for this girl. After all, if not for her indulgence, she wouldn't have got herself killed and also harmed his daughter. Bryan drove 2 thick, long nails fiercely into Marco's thighs, then attached electrical wires to the nails. Subsequently, he took out his daughter's photo and interrogated Marco, asking where his daughter was exactly. Unexpectedly, Marco was quite tough and actually spat saliva in Bryan's face. Seeing this, Bryan decided to give Marco a little punishment, so he pressed the switch. He usually used this method on heinous terrorists. The electric current made Marco's whole body tremble. Bryan asked the same question again, but unexpectedly Marco still did not yield. So, after the second electric shock, Marco finally yielded. He told Bryan that a pure girl like Kim had been sold to a wealthy merchant named Saint-Clair. The interrogation finally yielded results, and Bryan prepared to leave. Marco desperately begged him to let him go, but Bryan would not spare the person who kidnapped his daughter. At this time, Jean-Claude just arrived home and his 2 children welcomed him enthusiastically. But what he didn't expect was that an uninvited guest was waiting for him at home, the last person he ever wanted to see, Bryan. Jean-Claude pretended he wanted to send the 2 children to their rooms to sleep first. He stopped by the bathroom on the way and took out a pistol from a hidden compartment to hide behind his back. After returning to the dining table, this pair of old friends were now like strange enemies, with sharp words and intense verbal exchanges. It wasn't until Bryan said that Jean-Claude was actually a corrupt cop who took money from the gang that the humiliated and angry Jean-Claude pulled out his pistol directly. He shouted loudly for his wife Isabelle to shut up. It was visible that Jean-Claude was about to lose his reason. But at this moment, Bryan tossed out several bullets. It turned out Bryan had taken the bullets out of the gun before Jean-Claude came home. Now it was Bryan's turn to take the initiative. He pulled out a pistol and shot Isabelle in the shoulder with a single shot, without a trace of pity. Bryan told Jean-Claude that if he didn't say who that Saint-Clair actually was, he would not hesitate to blow Isabelle's head off. Jean-Claude, who was also a father of 2 children, knew Bryan was not joking. He finally yielded. He connected to the police intranet system and helped Bryan find Saint-Clair's personal information and address. Bryan knocked Jean-Claude down with 1 punch. He was about to start his final operation. Bryan found Saint-Clair's residence. He followed this person all the way to the elevator lobby, but was stopped by security. After dealing with the security, he took the elevator to the underground floor. There were several rooms here, and Bryan wasn't clear what was done inside. Bryan held red wine pretending to be a waiter and just happened to see someone walking out of a room. He walked into the room and found a young man sitting in a seat constantly pressing buttons to bid. And in the central hall in front of him, there stood a nearly half-naked young woman. The woman looked dazed, seemingly unaware that all around her were countless people pointing at her like looking at a piece of merchandise, pressing price buttons against each other. And the young man in the room where Bryan was had just spent 250,000 euros to win the woman. Immediately following, the final auction item of the night came up to the center of the hall. When the newly arrived young woman slowly turned her face, Bryan finally saw her face clearly. It was his daughter Kim whom he had been bitterly searching for. Bryan took out his pistol, controlled the man in front of him, and made him press the button to bid for Kim. But the young man seemed unwilling to buy. only reluctantly taking action under coercion. It seemed others were very interested in Kim, as the price skyrocketed, shooting directly up to $450,000. Bryan saw an old man opposite constantly bidding against him, so he simply pressed the button himself to set the price directly at $500,000. Finally, no one competed with him anymore. Seeing Kim being sent off stage, he quickly took the young man out of the room, but as soon as he went out the door, he was knocked unconscious by a punch from behind. When he woke up, he found himself suspended in the air, and that Saint-Clair was standing in front of them. It turned out he was the boss of this underground auction. When he heard that Bryan was the father of the last girl, he actually said shamelessly that he was also a father of 3 children, but business is business, and he couldn't return Kim to him. This elite who seemed to belong to high society was doing things worse than beasts behind the scenes. He ordered his men to finish off Bryan, and he left with a swagger. Several subordinates in suits began to act. One of them strangled Bryan's neck fiercely. In a moment of desperation, Bryan pulled the suspension bar apart with force, broke free from the restraints, and cleanly and sharply dealt with several thugs. He fished out a key from a corpse and unlocked his handcuffs. He walked out of the dungeon and saw Saint-Clair, who was just acting arrogantly, standing right in front of him. This time, Saint-Clair was dumbfounded. He didn't expect this Bryan could take out all his men. Bryan shot directly without hesitation, forcing him to say where he had taken his daughter. He didn't listen to any of this beast's explanations at all, just shooting Saint-Clair's limbs one by one, and finally learned that Kim was sent to a yacht at the nearby pier. Bryan ran out of the mansion and saw the young man getting into a car with his daughter. Bryan ran wildly all the way. Although he was already over 50, he was still full of stamina. He chased to the bridgehead and saw that his daughter had indeed been put on a yacht. He quietly approached a sedan parked at the pier, seized the vehicle, and chased straight after the yacht, which had already sailed far. He couldn't afford to waste a single second, so he floored the accelerator and sped through the streets. Finally, he ran onto the bridge. And at this moment, the yacht happened to be passing under the bridge. Bryan leaped off the bridge and landed on the boat. After fiercely strangling a bodyguard to death, Bryan broke into the cabin alone and took out several patrolling bodyguards by himself. The intense gunfire alarmed Sheikh Rahman's private bodyguard Ali inside the ship, who quickly ordered his men to strengthen security, so a fierce battle unfolded. Just as Bryan was dealing with other bodyguards, Ali suddenly flashed out and fired at him. Bryan, who was hit in the arm, pounced with all his might, knocking Ali down and engaging in close quarters combat with him. Ali pulled out a curved knife, wanting to put Bryan to death. His skills were vicious, and he went back and forth with Bryan on par for several rounds, while Bryan was cut with several bloody wounds by the curved knife. The two fought from the corridor to the bedroom. Bryan used a smashed wine bottle as a weapon. He used all his strength to finish off Ali. Bryan stumbled into the final room and found a sheikh holding a knife hostage against Kim. Bryan killed the sheikh with one shot. He finally saved his daughter, and Kim couldn't believe her father had traveled thousands of miles to save her. She threw herself into her father's arms and wept bitterly, as if she had just experienced a nightmare. Bryan brought his daughter to a villa and rang the doorbell. Kim still didn't know who was behind the door, but when she saw that the person opening the door was actually the popular female singer Shira, she was so surprised she couldn't even speak. After enduring countless hardships, all the good things were only just beginning. Did everything end perfectly like this? Actually, a greater crisis is still waiting for Bryan.